The Color of Your Eyes, written by Blackcatsassin, read by gutterratt1213. Chapter 37, Confrontation. He spilled the beans? Really? Of course, I will check the group chat. Yes, I will show Jake all the information you guys gathered. Wow, good job, Team Hawkins. Yeah, you three should go and catch some sleep now. By the way, where are you holding him now? Not in the office anymore, right? That would be too risky. Hannah sounded excited as she was on a call with Thomas. A couple seconds of silence. Oh, okay, well, I didn't expect that at all. Okay, well, as long as he is alive. Okay, I don't think anyone can find him there. I think Phil knows what he's doing. Okay, see you later. And again, good job to all three of you. Hannah closed the call and turned around. Good news! Phil, Jessy, and Thomas were successful in extracting information from Poke. She smiled as she looked at Lilly. Lilly nodded as she put all of Jake's equipment she picked up from his hideout on the dining room table. Only her, Hannah, Jake, and Richy have now remained in the apartment. Jake gave her and Hannah instructions on where to get his equipment and how to build it all up on the biggest table Hannah had. Right now, Jake was still very much out and almost seemed to be in a comatose sleep. He was now sleeping in Hannah's room, again, where the blinds were down, making it as dark as possible to give Jake a much better sleep. Hannah and Lilly also seemed to suddenly feel overwhelmed with tiredness. I think we should all follow suit and sleep for a couple hours, Hannah suggested. Richy and Lilly agreed, as it had been a very long day. Lilly prepared the couch and turned it into a bed, while Richy just made himself comfortable on the lounge chair. Hannah turned off the lights, and her apartment, which was once full of sounds and talks an hour ago, was now silent. It didn't take long for the three to fall asleep. Hannah's last thought was how she was lucky to be back, and how she understood now that running away from her mistakes was never a good option. She knew that her younger, fragile self was too weak to cope with her guilt, but now, knowing how far her friends and siblings went for her, she did not feel scared anymore. There was nothing scarier than never seeing the people you love anymore. The sound of bubbling water woke Hannah up, jerking her awake from a weird dream she had. She looked around and saw through the kitchen where Lilly and Richy were preparing coffee and breakfast. A smile spread on her face. A sight like that almost made her forget the horrors that happened weeks ago. Hannah got up and freshened herself in the bathroom before she went to the kitchen to help Richy as Lilly was setting the table. The bedroom door opened and a very sleepy Jake came out. He rubbed the back of his head, looking a bit embarrassed, when Lilly approached him. Nah? Back from the dead? Lilly teased. Jake smiled.
I have to admit, thanks to you two being adamant, I was able to catch some good sleep. My head doesn't hurt as much, and my temperature has dropped now. I still feel sluggish, but I'm ready to get back to our plan to save Leah.
But first, breakfast, Lilly exclaimed, and pulled Jake with her. Jake couldn't help but smile wider, and he ruffled Lily's hair, which in turn made her poke Jake, who, in turn, poked her back. Lilly giggled and tried to avoid Jake's poking, but somehow Jake always managed to catch an unguarded poking spot. The two then playfully started to poke each other, which ended with Lilly jumping on Jake's back to prevent him from continuing his attacks. Hannah laughed seeing the two wrestle with each other as she put a basket of bread on the table. Suddenly the doorbell rang, and she went to open the door. Jake pleaded for Lilly to get off of him, but Lilly was adamant that Jake admitted defeat first. When they both turned around, they froze, and Lilly jumped off Jake immediately. Mr. and Mrs. Donfort were standing in the hallway, looking at both of them. Mom! Dad! Lilly gasped. Hannah came with a furious look on her face. Dad, I told you not to barge in! She was now standing in front of Jake, trying to shield him from the eyes of her parents. Mr. Donfort spoke while his eyes remained on Jake with an indescribable expression on his face. We were worried, sweetie. Mrs. Donfort spoke. You didn't pick up your phone since yesterday, and Lilly only sent a couple of messages. We thought something had happened again. We just had to be sure you two were all right. You can't really blame us. Hannah's mother got a bit teary-eyed. We were very occupied. Hannah bit her lips, unsure if she should mention Leah and Mike Warren, but opted not to.
And who is this young man? Your boyfriend, Lilly?
Mr. Donfort sounded calm, but Hannah could hear a hint of annoyance in his voice. This made her pissed off even more. No, he's not. He is... Lilly was about to say something, but covered her mouth mid-sentence. Meanwhile, Jake tried his best to avoid anyone's gaze. He looked down as if his mere presence in between the Donfort family members was shameful. They all remained silent for a moment. The tension between all of them became unbearable, making Hannah the first to say something. Well, Mom, Dad, it was nice to visit me, but you two have to go now. She forced a smile and tried to push her parents towards the door. Suddenly, Lilly yelled from behind the three. You got anything to confess, Dad? Hannah gasped and turned around. Jake became pale as a ghost and looked at Lilly with a pleading look, shaking his head a little. Mr. Donfort furrowed his brows.
What do you mean, Lilly? You think I have something to confess?
Mrs. Donfort looked confused, and Hannah gave Lilly a warned look. Jake grabbed Lily's hand. Lilly, please, Jake whispered. No! Lilly pulled her hand away. I'm sick of pretending that you are not what you are, and I'm sick of playing happy family with Dad. Lilly, Hannah hissed. Not now. She nodded towards her mother. No, Mom deserves to know as well. Lilly stomped her foot. And Jake deserves to be acknowledged, especially after everything he did to save you. Is it true? Mrs. Donfort stepped forward. You helped to save my daughter? Jake locked eyes with her and then lowered his head, his expression still full of shame. Yes, Mom, it was thanks to Jake and another friend that I was able to be found. They were the ones who gave Alan the clues of where to find me. I owe Jake and Leah my life. Before anyone could say any more, Mrs. Donfort walked to Jake and hugged him tightly. Thank you so much for saving Hannah. I never lost hope, but it became unbearable the more I hoped for her return.
Thank you.
Mr. Donfort stepped forward towards Jake, who flinched at his approach. Mrs. Donfort released Jake and looked back and forth between her husband and then Jake. See? Jake is a really good person, and he deserves to be acknowledged, Lilly stated. Acknowledged? Mrs. Donfort asked, still looking unsure.
Lilly, please.
Jake closed his eyes as if he just wanted to disappear. Suddenly, a phone started to vibrate in the background. Jake was about to turn around to check whose phone was vibrating when Lilly hesitantly said the dreaded words. Jake is your son, Dad. Mr. Donfort looked shocked. His demeanor changed from serious to utter disbelief. Mrs. Donfort gasped, and she studied Jake from head to toe. What is the meaning of this, Lilly? Are you saying this man here is your brother? She turned to her husband, who still hadn't said a word. Nathan, is that true? Did you have a son? Mr. Donfort was at a loss for words. Since when did you have a son? Mrs. Donfort started to cry.
I didn't know.
Her husband shook his head. I'm sorry, I can't. Mrs. Donfort composed herself and turned around, leaving the apartment. Mr. Donfort looked at Jake one more time before going after his wife. The girls watched their parents leave the apartment before the door got slammed shut. Silence. Nothing else could be heard except the sound of Hannah's wall clock. Not Hannah, Lilly, nor Jake said a word. Sounds of someone eating could be heard from the kitchen. They all turned around to only see Richy peeking out from the kitchen, eating a peanut butter sandwich.
Oh, don't mind me. I'm just having some breakfast,
he said sheepishly.